Good evening and welcome. People are still filing in, but I will start off. A lot of you have been very prompt today, so thank you so much for that. I'm Laura Reckford, Executive Director of the Falmouth Art Center, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. One quick bit of business, and you may have just heard that we will be recording the talk tonight because several people could not make it, and so we'll be sending them the recording. And a brief plug about the Falmouth Art Center. We are free and open to the public daily. We have 3 exhibits every month, 36 shows a year. And this is the last week, the last weekend really, for several of our shows. Right now in the Herman Gallery, we have our annual juried photo show. Next week in that same gallery, we have an open call for art for our Special Spaces, Special Places show. And we are asking artists, and many of you are artists on this call, to use their unique perspectives, reflections, and backgrounds to depict a place special to them. And in our Landro Partan Gallery, we have right now Below the Surface, just for a few more days, as I said, that's a collaboration between Woods Hole oceanographic scientists and local artists. And next week in that gallery, that will change, and that will be 21 in Truro, which is the works of a group of women artists who have been painting together on a retreat for more than 20 years out to Truro in the Outer Cape. And in our gallery upstairs, our Siegel Gallery, we have the works right now, just for 3 more days, of Mesha Noor, and she's inspired by her native Pakistan. And next week in that same gallery, we will have the artwork of Minu Khanbabe. And we have art receptions every month. They're on Zoom right now. They may be in person soon. The next one is on June 14th, the second Monday of every month at 4 o'clock. On Zoom, we'll have those artists from 21 in Truro and Manu and others talking about their artwork. Of course, we have classes for adults and children. You can check that all out on our website, falmouthart.org. We're here tonight for a conversation with Nell Painter, the author of the fascinating memoir, Old in Art School, as well as a number of acclaimed books on history, including The History of White People. We are so honored to have Dr. Painter here with us. But before introducing her, I'm going to explain the format. We're going to start off with Claudia Smith-Jacobs, who, as many of you know Claudia, she's an artist and a very popular Falmouth Art Center art teacher. And she will start off by asking the questions with Dr. Painter, starting off that first part of the conversation. And if you have a question during that time, you can go ahead and put it in the chat and we will ask it later on in the session. Then we will go to sharing the screen and showing some of Dr. Painter's artwork. And that will be on the shared screen. And during that time, feel free to ask questions. And then we will have time for more questions at the end, and I'll field the questions from the chat. Many of you know about the mute button. Please have yourself on mute during the talk. And then at the end, when we have questions, you can ask them in the chat or take yourself off mute for questions. You can toggle between the speaker and the gallery view, but I will be highlighting Nell and Claudia for all of you. So you'll be seeing them on the large boxes on your screen for the first part of the session. And without further ado, I want to introduce Nell Painter. And so I'll start with her official formal name that she uses as a historian. Nell Irvin Painter is a leading historian in the United States. She's the Edwards Professor of American History, Emerita at Princeton University, in addition to her earned doctorate in history from Harvard University. She has received honorary doctorates from Wesleyan, Dartmouth, SUNY-New Paltz, and Yale. She's a fellow of the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, and she has held fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the American Antiquarian Society. She has served as president of the Organization of American Historians and the Southern Historical Association. A prolific and award-winning scholar. Among her books, as I already mentioned, The History of White People and Creating Black Americans, African American History and Its Meanings from 1619 to the Present, and Sojourner Truth, A Life, a Symbol, as well as several other books and numerous articles and other writings. We're thrilled to have her here with us tonight. And now I will turn it over to Claudia Smith-Jacobs to start the conversation with Nell Painter.
Hello, Dr. Painter.
Hello, Claudia Smith-Jacobs.
It's an honor to speak with you this evening.
Thank you.
We're going to chat a bit about two of your books, Old in Art School and The History of White People. And in both books, as I read them, I got the sense that the subtext in both of them is transition. Old in Art School resonates with those of us, and there are many of us in the audience, who have always been artists in our hearts, but who have, for a variety of reasons, worked all of our lives in other careers, and only now that we have retired, been able to devote our time to art.
Yes.
Please think of yourself, Dr. Painter, as being in the fellowship of your brothers and sisters here this evening, all of us together on a journey of transition and artistic development. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Very good. I'm in Newark, New Jersey, in a fourth floor walk-up loft. Newark is a wonderful place. We have not been here very much in the last year and a half, however, on account of COVID. My husband and I have been COVID refugees, pandemic refugees in the Adirondacks of far northern New York.
Oh, beautiful.
Nice, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, are you painting? Have you painted today?
No, I have not. Well, I haven't painted in a long time. I would say I've been drawing for the whole year of 2020. I've made no art by my hand this year because I have been writing and talking. I've been talking a lot.
Yes.
Ever since Trump, but even building since George Floyd, Americans want to know about white people. And I'm the expert on white people. So I talk a lot about the history of white people, which, as you pointed out, you said it was about transition. I say it's about change. As a historian, that's what we study, change over time.
Mm-hmm. Now, how has politics affected your drawing? Has it?
Deeply, deeply. Okay. The drawing that I did last year, and I surprised myself by doing a lot because for a lot of that time, I just felt totally blasted. But I made, I was an artist in residence at Bogliasco Foundation in Italy, ending on the 13th of March, if you can believe. And I made an artist book called American Whiteness Since Trump. It's 28 pages. It's at the James Fuentes Gallery. I'm online. And then in the summer, with the promise of the awful murder of George Floyd, the promise was the millions of Americans or hundreds and thousands of Americans of all sorts who came out in the streets to protest police brutality. I remember that police brutality has been a concern of African Americans for decades and decades and decades. And I go back, I did a piece for the New Yorker on the Black Panther Party's anti-police brutality art. So I can remember over the decades when police brutality was a cause that Black people protested, but usually with only a few non-Black allies. And last year we had hundreds and thousands of allies, which really made me feel safer in my country than I have forever. So I made a piece called From Slavery to Freedom, which a Faro Gallery commissioned, also drawings and text. And then at the end of the year, I made a very personal piece, which is not political. It's just honest, it's personal. It's very revealing. I come out as a knitter, and the piece is called I Knit Socks for Adrian.
Wonderful title.
I love it.
Wonderful title. So would you say that you're really using multimedia, multi-sensory? You're knitting.
I've been a knitter since the 80s, but I always thought of knitting as kind of my my mental health. Like you, for years, I have lived the life of the eye, even when I was a historian. And I expressed that through knitting with, with the yarn and the colors and the textures. That was my visual outlet. And I've continued knitting. Knitting is very comforting to me. For the whole of 2020 and now even, I knitted socks. So my husband and I have 1 trillion socks, and I knit socks for Adrian. And in the text that goes with the piece, I say that this is the most revealing personal piece of artwork I've ever made, because I come out as a knitter.
Yes.
Because of all the connotations and the stereotypes around knitting and old ladies, I preferred that you think of me as a historian or a visual artist, and you envision me drawing and painting in my studio or writing real smart stuff, things like that, but not sitting in my corner knitting, which is what I was doing.
Well, when you think of it, knitting has a long history, not just with women, but also with men, sailors on whaling ships and, so I'm glad to hear that you're doing that, because essentially—
I want to catch you with the sailors on ships.
Yeah.
When I knit socks, I knit in the round. So I knit Anglo-Saxon with the yarn in the right hand. But if I knit a sweater, I knit continental. And the person who taught me that was Maya Angelou's mother, who spent a long time on ships. And it was sailors who taught her. It was Swedish sailors and Dutch sailors who taught her how to knit continental. And she taught me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. You and I have a few things in common. We both graduated from college in the same year.
Aha.
We won't say what year, but we did.
I'll say it, 1964.
There we go. All right.
Yeah.
We both did graduate work at UCLA in African history.
Really?
Really? And we were born 7 months and 3 days apart.
Congratulations.
And you have a birthday coming up.
Yeah.
August 2nd.
That's right. 1992.
Now I have a question for you. When you were an undergraduate at UCal Berkeley, my brother's alma mater, you majored in anthropology, and you did your junior year abroad in Bordeaux,
right,
studying French medieval history.
Right.
Why French medieval history?
I was really curious about the city and about what I walked through to get to the faculté. At that time, the University of Bordeaux was downtown, and I walked from where I was living in a place called Cour Marc-Nouot, which was named for a resistant. The resistance is no longer, this was 1962, 1963. And in France, it was really post-war in a way that I had never experienced California. It sounds like you're a Californian too. So Cour Marc-Nouot was named for this resistance. So there was history. And I would walk through the central square with all these old buildings, and I just wondered about history. I was very opposed to American history in high school and college. I actually purposefully tested out of American history, because I thought it was a pack of lies. It wasn't a
Well,
pack of lies. It was
yes.
a pack of omissions. So I didn't believe it. But when it was somebody else's history, it was really interesting. And I loved it. And that's the year that made me a historian.
Interesting. Now, have you left medieval history behind, or do you carry it with you, or could you revisit it at another time? Or...
I pretty much left medieval history.
Okay.
It was much more exciting in the late 60s to be doing American history when I could do it and I could do it my way. That was not my feeling in the early 60s.
But and then you were very clever. You picked yourself up and you went to Ghana as a French lecturer.
Yeah, my parents picked themselves up and I just joined them. And I had a useful skill in Ghana. This was the Ghana of Kwame Nkrumah. So it was socialist and it was very international. And so I taught telephone operators French so that they could host, Ghana could host the Organization of African Unity.
Ah, indeed. And then you went to the University of Ghana, didn't you, in African Studies?
I did. That's when I started graduate school.
It's terrific. Now, what brought you back to the States in 66?
Coup d'etat.
Yeah, yeah. Had your parents been there before you went in 64?
Yes,
they were.
I joined them.
Okay. How long have they been there? I'm curious. That's interesting.
We were there for 2 years.
Okay.
The most famous person who was there was Maya Angelou. Then
I was going to say, I know. Yeah. Okay. Then you went to UCLA grad school, got your master's. And I'm just sharing this so everybody, so we're all on the same page. And so I can just applaud you because I think you're just wonderful. And then in 69, you came to Massachusetts, to Harvard.
That's right.
Got your PhD. Amazing. That's all I have to say.
I'll tell you what really surprised me coming across the country. So by 69, I had been in Africa and I had been in Europe, but I had only briefly visited the East Coast. My mother's brother, her closest sibling, lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. But driving across the country, what really amazed me about the East is that it was green in the summer.
As opposed to?
As opposed to sort of sandy colored, buff colored
California. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Now, at Princeton, and I want you to share this with people, as Laura said, you were the Edwards Professor of American History, which meant you had a chair. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay, so for those of us, myself included, who don't know the importance of that, would you tell us a chair?
Well, it depends on when and where.
Okay.
In the olden days, I mean, my chair was also olden days because it was 20th century, but it used to be very rare and only old white men got them. And when you got a chair, you got money too. By the time I got a chair, they were not quite as rare. And you didn't have to be quite so old. And you didn't, pretty much you still had to be a white man. But the additional money was not attached. It's just a line you could put to say, I'm more than a full professor. Now there are many, many more chairs with many, many more names. Some of them maybe have money, I don't know. But there are more chairs now than there used to be.
Okay, well, congratulations on that. Absolutely. Now, at what point did you begin thinking art and art school? I mean, you thought art from childhood, but at what point did you begin to think, you know, I am going to make this a move. I'm going to make a new career here?
Well, my husband and I have different versions of that, of when was the time I decided to make a new career. but I can tell you how I began to immerse myself in images, and that was with Sojourner Truth in the 90s. Sojourner Truth did not read and write, but she had her photographs taken. So everything we know of her in words comes from other people, including the famous slogan, which she did not say. That was made up by a white woman journalist 12 years after Sojourner Truth spoke in Ohio. But so already with Sojourner Truth, I had to deal with, you might say, the perfidy of the text. And I could not get to her self-concept through words. The closest I could come to her self-concept was through the photographs that she sat for and she paid for. And this was crucial because she could show herself the way she wanted to be seen. So Sojourner Truth's self-fashioning is of a very well-dressed, composed woman holding the photograph of her grandson who's in the Union Army, or her knitting. So that juxtaposition of the Sojourner Truth of the image and the Sojourner Truth that had come down to me, the sort of fierce, challenging, unbridled, fiery Sojourner Truth, and the composed bourgeois Sojourner Truth. That's how I got started in the biography, actually. Which one?
Oh,
Sojourner Truth.
interesting. Now, what role did your mother, who was a very interesting woman, what role did she play? Tell us a little bit about her, would you?
Oh, I could talk about my mother for a long time.
There's no time limit.
Yeah, there's a time limit. This would take forever. But let me try to shape it to answer your question. My mother started writing books after she retired at 65. And she wrote one book, which was about the nice middle-class Black people who were our friends. It's called The Unsung Heart of Black America. It took her 10 years to research, write it, and get it published. And then she wrote another book, which she also got published, which was the one that was really crucial for me. It's a memoir, for one thing. And it's called, I Hope I Look That Good When I'm That Old. Because people said that to her all the time. But the really crucial part, I mean, it was important that this woman, this Black American woman, could say, I look good, or at least people tell me I look good. And
I have seen her picture. Let me jump in right here.
Yeah.
And she was beautiful.
Yeah.
That wonderful skin.
Yeah.
And she looked, if you told her age, I would not believe it.
Yeah. So, but she was a dark-skinned woman, like
beautiful.
Me. And
beautiful.
Of course, being a dark-skinned woman in her generation, she was born in 1917, she could not feel beautiful. She could not, she was invisible in a largely white world, and she was not beautiful in a largely Black world because she was too dark-skinned.
Mm. Now, I'm sorry.
Used the word old in her memoir. And that gave me permission to use the word old. So as you can tell, I'm pretty out about being old. I would like to do for old what James Brown's did for Black. James Brown said, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And I like to say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. And when I was on the book tour 3 years ago now, if I had a really good audience, I would say, do you want to say it? And they would say, yeah. And so the first part was say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And the audiences would say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. You know, this would be a lot of old white people saying it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And then I'd say it loud, I'm old and I'm proud. That was harder.
It is very hard. We are sort of indoctrinated. We really are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, when you started making that decision, was it scary for you? How scary was it for you to begin to think, I'm going to retire from academia. I have a very important position. I'm a very important person. And now I'm going to go back as an undergraduate.
It didn't seem that way. I did not feel like a very important person. And I had been thinking about it. My husband was very supportive. I had saved up the money, which is a really big thing for art school. Art is not for poor people. I mean, it is for poor people, but it's an expensive habit. It's an expensive education, and it's not going to pay your rent. So there's a material side to going to art school and going into art that I was very fortunate to be able to deal with. In fact, generally, I am very grateful because I have been a fortunate person in my life. I'm very grateful. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm this important person and now I'm going to do something else. It was, geez, I don't know anything about this. So I figured I really needed some foundations. So I went to Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers, and then for my BFA, and then for my MFA, went to the Rhode Island School of Design, both.
Right. And I know that you wanted or you planned to get into Yale, but do you
as Laura said, I have an honorary degree from Yale, which predates my change of life, so to speak. And I have a very distinguished artist friend, Barbara Chase Reboul.
Oh, yes. I remember when she started.
Yeah. So when Yale turned me down, I said, Barbara, Yale turned me down. I've got an honorary doctorate from them. How dare they? She said, my dear, I would have turned you down.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a good friend at that point.
It's all about the portfolio.
Exactly. I remember when she was in Europe.
She still is.
Is she still? Okay. Now, do you have any advice you'd like to offer to people listening to you this evening who might be thinking about making major transitions in their lives?
Yeah, I do. The first is consider what you want to do and then consider your situation. So for instance, if you want to get an MFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design, as my father used to say, save your money. If you want to make the art that appeals to your own eye, I would say make the art that appeals to your own eye and make a lot of it, and make the art that only you can make. If you're thinking about, geez, how do I get started? What do I want to do? I'd say use the local community college near you to explore the various ways of making art. Or for you, probably Falmouth Arts Center would be for the people in the audience, Falmouth Arts Center would be a very good resource to investigate what kind of art is your kind of art.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the history of white people.
Yeah.
Now, in a sense, this is a book about change.
Exactly.
And let's talk a bit about the chapters on enlargement. People who are now considered white Americans, who were not always considered white.
Wait. This is the hardest part for Americans.
Yes.
This is the hardest part for Americans. That is to say that in the early 20th century, there were people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. They were considered white. It's not that they became white. When they got to the United States, okay, they became white when they came to the United States. But in the United States, they were considered white. Men could vote, adult men could vote, but they were considered members of inferior white races. In the 19th century in your Massachusetts, impoverished Irish were definitely white. Men could vote, and through that vote, they could become policemen and their daughters could become teachers. Thank you for the vote, which Black Americans at that time did not have access to. They were considered white people, but there were many white races, and Irish people belonged to the Celtic race, which was a white race. The new immigrants of the early 20th century, they came and were considered members of the Northern Italian race, or members of the Southern Italian race, or members of the Eastern European, members of the Eastern European Hebrew race. They were all white races. There were many white races. It's only in the middle of the 20th century that we get the reigning idea, thanks to scholars like Franz Boas, that there were only 3 real races. And there were real races according to this way of thinking. They were in an order, hierarchical order: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. There was only one big white race that you could then be in or out of. It's a different way of thinking about white races in the late 20th century as opposed to the early 20th century and the 19th century. Okay, I interrupted you, sorry.
No, you did exactly what I was going to ask you to do. It was perfect. And while we're on that subject, would you talk about the history of the word slave?
Yeah.
So the geography of it before the Atlantic slave trade.
Sure. The word slave in English comes from Slav, and it's rooted in an area of the world, the Balkans, Ukraine, the Caucasus. These are areas where the people were modest peasants, and they were subject to slave raiding by Cossacks, for instance, in what is now Ukraine. They were subject to being rounded up and sent to the Eastern Mediterranean, the rich part of the Western world. And so slave, Slav. And the millenniums old slave trade in the Western world goes through the Black Sea. And that was the slave trade that nourished the sugar production. When the New World opened and it became clear that that was a really good place to make sugar, and that was a market for labor. So the combination of the market for labor across the Atlantic, of the technology of shipping people, the mercantile infrastructure, which was European largely, and the European part was on the coast of places like Angola, and then the equivalent of Cossacks, you can call them African Cossacks if you wish, we often speak of warlords, who would do the same thing that happened in places like the Caucasus and Ukraine, that is, harvest the steppe, go round up helpless peasants, and ship them off. It was a business, and even though I think probably the mass of Americans think about slavery as a racial institution and slave trade as a racial trade, it is not. It belongs to business history.
Interesting point of view, and I agree with you. I have absolutely well said. Now let's jump back to you in art school. Okay, and just correct me if this image doesn't fit. you are so focused and such a dynamite achiever that finding you in art school with a bunch of pierced and tattooed and semi-hungover 20-somethings must have been a bit of a culture shock, no?
Well, you know, I had taught undergraduates at Princeton, but the Princeton undergraduates are pretty different from the art school undergraduates. But yeah, they were really interesting. They were really interesting, and they treated me decently. You know, mostly they ignored me, which was the right thing to do. But they reminded me of the way they treated me, as most of my teachers did as well, that what made me singular was that I was old. And in art school, you're old after 32.
Did you go in feeling old, or did you feel old because they made you feel invisible and old?
The latter, yeah.
The latter, yeah.
I was really used to moving through the world as a Black woman, as a Black American woman. When I taught at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I became aware of being a Westerner as opposed to Southerners, because I don't have any reverence for the past. And the Southern people I knew did. So I felt very Californian. But to feel that the first part, the most obvious part of my identity was that I was old, that did come as a shock.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that your mother was born in Texas.
Yes.
Your father, and you too. But yes. you left very small. I mean, you were like 8 months or something.
10 weeks old.
Yeah, right. Now, are there ways in which you, as Dr. Nell Painter, professor from Princeton, the historian, could you learn that piece of you and apply it to you as the artist and vice versa?
No.
Aha, two separate worlds.
Well, they come together now, but I am 10 years after my MFA, and it took 10 years for me to find a way to use history, text, and image together. 10 years, because in art, as I experienced it, the worst thing people can call you is academic. And there's no academicer person than me. I mean, it's like I was born carrying around books. So I had to somehow shed that. And in some senses, and at some points, I felt that my strengths of persistence and hard work and productivity, of planning, of persistence, were almost seen as weaknesses, or certainly the wrong thing. And I do know that I have always had to remind myself, and sometimes others have had to remind me, to loosen up.
Interesting. Now, you described the world, and these are capital letters, how the world of art, capital W, capital A, works. Would you tell everybody about the difference between artists with a small letter A, a lowercase a, and artists with a capital A?
Yeah. So when I was at RISD, one of my teachers told me I would never be an artist. And an artist is the capital A artist. And an artist makes wonderful art, is really interesting, has a dealer, has collector, and people say, oh, Nell Painter, the artist, that would be a capital A artist. And just a regular old person who makes art, like, is a woman. Or an old lady or something like that. At any rate, so I realized that I could never be an artist in that sense, because I could never be a young thin white man. But my teacher who used that phrase, an artist, told me, I mean, and I will quote him directly, said, you may sell your art. You may have collectors. You may have a dealer, but you will never be an artist. And I thought, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
bullshit. That's the definition of an artist.
You know, the lack of support is like mind-boggling. You have a wonderful quote in the book. And may I quote you?
Please.
Is that all right? Okay. The art world has no firm criteria but beyond the market for deciding what is good art.
Yeah.
There is too much good work in the world to explain in terms of quality alone. Who counts as an artist worth noting and who gets ignored? I, meaning you, could see that who counted had to do with race and gender and class and place. New York, yes. New Jersey, no. Gorgeous quote. Now, how have you worked around that?
There, my age saved me because I was already too old to be an artist. And my husband teaches at Rutgers, and we live in Newark, and I was not going to move to Brooklyn like all my fellow students did right away. And over the years, I mean, it hasn't been easy. I went through periods of self-doubt and fear. I realized that there's, you know, you quoted the part about there are too many good artists for us to be able to hold them in mind. And my town of Newark is one of those places. So I am a Newark artist. I'm proudly a Newark artist. And I dedicated Olden Art School to my husband who made it possible and to the arts community of my town of Newark. So I was old enough to realize that I was not just what the world thought of me and my place, and here I mean literally as well as figuratively, was not just what the world thought of it.
Good for you. Now I have another question for you, and I can't wait to see how you're going to react. I hope you take it well. Okay, but I have to ask. Okay. I'm going to read it. I find it fascinating that I find you fascinating anyway, but I find it fascinating that you, who are the very poster child for the Black bourgeoisie, and I hope everyone knows what I mean by that. I'm referring to—
Not a compliment.
No, it's a compliment. It's a compliment. Oh, yeah. It refers to the upper that summers on the vineyard or in France or
No. I'm a Californian.
Or in California. Okay.
No, I mean, Californians, Westerners can't be that. That's one thing I learned in Massachusetts.
Oh, tell us.
Yeah, I don't like the vineyard, actually. It's too low-lying, it's humid, and it's full of people. The first thing out of their mouths is how long they've been coming to the vineyard.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
No.
And then the second thing is they pull out the paper bag and they look at hair.
Well, the people whom I know in the vineyard don't do that.
Oh,
but,
good. Oh, good.
I had almost never heard of the vineyard until I came to Harvard.
Okay.
I mean, some of my best friends go to the vineyard. I mean, that is literally true.
Okay.
But not me. And
okay.
I'm a Westerner. My grandfather was, it's true, a college professor at a small Black college, Straight University, now part of Dillard in New Orleans, but he didn't go to Amherst College. You know, my grandfather, my grandmother didn't go to Smith or Vassar as the Vineyard Peoples.
All right. Now that said, there's more to this probing. So get ready. Okay. All right. So what I mean, and it is a compliment, I mean, your life has been rich. You've gone to the best schools, taught at the best school, traveled all over. So that said, my question is, I'm curious, what has called you, because you have been gifted with a wonderful life. So what has called you to research and write about the downtrodden and the enslaved? That's my question.
Yeah, two things. One is just the pleasure of the intellectual investigation. I love research. I love writing. I get great pleasure from just doing that. And the most interesting people to me are working people. And that comes out of my lefty background. When I told you my parents were in Ghana, they were there to make the African Revolution.
I figured.
You know, to think of myself as part of the Black bourgeoisie is really surprises me, because when I was growing up, my parents were just full of scorn of the consumerism that they saw in the people they considered the Black bourgeoisie. And, you know, some of them were our friends, but we had different values.
Very good answer. Thank you very much on that. In terms of your writing, you're a wonderful writer. And I'm just in awe of the fact that you can actually change from a very scholarly style of writing with the footnotes and the bibliography, and then, as in the history of white people, and then in your olden art school, it's a very semi-conversational stream of consciousness way of writing. Is this something you have studied or something that came naturally? Is it just a lot of practice? Tell us a little bit about your writing.
I did not study writing. It did not come naturally. I have a very good agent who helped me go from the way that I write for as a historian, that is to say, to be faithful to the archives. I don't lie about it. I don't leave things out that I don't like. And to want you to read my words through my eyes. I want you to see what I see. I am explaining to you. That's not olden art school. Olden art school, you might say it's kind of a confession in a way. And it was hard to do. It was really hard to do. And at one point, I didn't think I could do it. But as I did it, you know, writing and rewriting and rewriting, rewriting, and writing by hand and reading aloud, and having my agent tell me, you know, open this up and go farther. I actually learned something about myself in the process. And the easiest way to explain that is to point to the chapter called A Bad Decision. That is the decision I made to go straight to graduate school after 3 years of undergraduate school. I should have stayed another year. I should have taken some years out. But at the time, I just felt so pressed. And I realized, looking back as I wrote, that it was my mother's dying that made my life feel compressed. And, you know, if you just go to the internet, go to the web, it will tell you, do not make an important decision while you're under psychological stress, which is just what I was doing. It was a stupid decision. It was a bad decision, but I couldn't see that or say that until I saw it and said it.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. Tell us what you mean when you use the expression seeing with 21st century eyes. What does that mean?
Yeah, that was my major handicap. So I grew up seeing some art. I didn't know great artists. My father was an amateur woodworker. My father taught me how to draw. And we had some art around. My father was a great admirer of Elizabeth Catlett and actually went to Mexico to buy some work from her, which I still have. So I wasn't a complete neophyte when it came to art, but my art was engaged art. It was Elizabeth Catlett. It was Charles White. It was Ben Shahn. It was Jacob Lawrence. And that art carries more than just visual meaning. It carries discursive meaning. It carries political meaning. And so that's what I thought art was. And also there's a level of craft in 20th century art that 21st century art, as I encountered it, kind of stands back from. As I encounter 21st century art, it prefers a spontaneity and a kind of do-it-yourself aesthetic. And that's what the part I mean about having to tell myself to loosen up. So if you look at the art that I made last year, you would see drips and drabs and things that in the 20th century, I would have cleaned up. My 20th century eyes would have cleaned it up, but not my 21st century eyes.
Interesting. Okay. Freer, more drips and drabs, leave it alone.
Yeah.
Add more maybe.
Yeah.
And throw in some knitting.
I haven't mastered being able to put that together yet.
It will come. It will come.
I made a wonderful collage when I was at the Brodsky Center in early 2017. And it's part of photograph and it's part scanned knitting of mine. And it has several images of Serena Williams in a very energetic pose. And I thought I had altered that image enough to pass as my own work. But the director of the center said, well, we better check on that because we don't want to edition it and then have the photographer or whoever owns that image come after us for copyright. So I put together for the people who own it, which is Getty, the original photograph, what I had done with the photograph by itself, which I had then repeated several times, and then within my artwork, including my knitting. And they wrote back and they said, every time you show or sell this, you're going to have to pay us $14,000.
Ooh.
So that piece has never been editioned.
Yeah. Now that is interesting to hear you say, and I'll tell you why. Because in your book, there is a comment, and it's among your RISD crits, where you talk about, and your teachers, you call teacher X, teacher Y, talks about the fact that, hey, nobody bothers with copyright anymore. We just use everybody's photograph. And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, here at the Falmouth Art Center, we're so careful about that. And so I'm thinking, have things changed so much? But apparently not. Okay. Now you're talking, and I'm glad that you are, because that was going to be one of my questions about process. And so you're using knitting, you're using collage. Tell us about Photoshop, image projection, and digital art, all those good things.
I work back and forth between the hand and the computer. And a digital process is very important. It was at first the way that I pulled myself out of discursive meaning. Of one of my teachers once said, you don't have to teach all the time, of just making what I wanted to see and that I wanted others to see. So when I draw, drawing can be kind of like writing in a way. But in Photoshop is based on pixels. And pixels don't have very much brain. They don't care what they're next to. They don't care what color they're next to. They don't care what texture or anything. And their idea of history, Photoshop's idea of history, is until you save or turn off your computer. That's it. So there's a whole different way of making meaning in the digital or disregard of making meaning that I found very freeing, and that opens up a whole world of image. I remember once when Olden Art School first came out, it was launched at the New York Public Library, and I was wearing the dress that my then sister-in-law, my brother, and his then wife had split. But she is African, and she makes African inflected clothing. And she had made me this dress, very lively dress. And then I had on a pair of cowboy boots. And at one point I said, I don't know if these go together. And then I thought, is that even a concept anymore? So that's what the digital will do for you. Go together? What's that?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, who you listed a lot of artists that you really are very fond of in your book, but that was a while back. Who could you name maybe your 3 or 4, famous or not even famous, your favorite artists?
There are too many of them, and I won't forget many of their names. But right now, on our walls up in the Adirondacks, we have a couple of wonderful prints by, oh God, see, I'm forgetting her name too, Margot Humphrey. Not well known. She and I took drawing lessons together at the California College of Arts and Crafts when we were in high school. She stayed in art. She has become a tremendous printmaker. Recently retired from the University of Maryland. Another artist I like very much in the West Coast, who just had a big show, and I hope is finally getting her due, is Mary Lovelace O'Neill, a tremendous painter. My patron saint of painting is Robert Colescott. Andy Warhol has influenced the way I work. Romare Bearden has influenced the way I work. I don't work, I mean, my mediums are not like Faith Ringgold, but Faith Ringgold's spirit of keeping at it and making narrative work, figurative narrative work, is also an influence.
It has been wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you.
Do you have a parting message for our audience?
Yes. Do your work only you can make, and make a lot of it.
Thank you so much.
And we're not absolutely done yet. So we have questions from the audience, and we've got one that has come in from our newest select person, Anjali Scott Price, is asking, I'm curious about how Dr. Painter feels in all white spaces, being the expert on white people, literally writing the book. How does that affect how she interacts with white people?
Well, I interact with a lot of white people. My husband is a white Kansan, but I don't think of you as white, dear. He's a credit to his race. I will not talk to strange white people if I don't have to, especially if they're going to be defensive. If they're going to be defensive, I will not talk to them. I find that I can deal with white people on a one-to-one, usually very easily, but something happens to white people when they get in large clumps, and they racialize themselves. They become white people as opposed to people. I mean, this may happen to Black people too, that without my seeing it. But in terms of audiences, they've changed over the years. When I first published the book and I was doing book talks, in the questions and answers, the questions would always be about Black people. It's like, here's a book that's called The History of White People, and the cover is white. It's pretty clearly about white people, and all the questions would be about Black people. Over the years, Americans have gotten a little more used to talking about white people as racialized people, but it's something that I talk about a lot. Claudia asked me if I had been able to make art recently, and I haven't this year because I've been talking a lot. And a lot of the questions are about white people. And so the first thing I have to say is that we're talking about two things. One is race, which is an ideology, which changes over time and over place, and who's speaking to whom, when, where, and for what purpose. And racism, which is a fact of life in the United States with real material consequences. It costs people money, it costs people their health if they live in unhealthful settings. Racism is a real thing. So in short, since I live up north, I live in a world that's mostly white people, not completely, but a lot of white people. And I couldn't do that if I didn't live in Newark. And I apologize for the light coming over my head. I'm facing a window that goes to the west, and I can't see my husband to ask him to put the shade down.
No worries, no worries. We can see you.
Good.
And here comes another question. The questions are starting to roll in here. This one is on almost every question you talk about relationship. Can you talk more about the role of relationship?
I wasn't aware of that. But as people, we are in relationships. I'm not quite sure what the question means.
And I don't either. So we'll move on to the next one. It was, okay, here's a comment and question. It was such a pleasure to hear you, Dr. Painter, in the Seeing White podcast series, and an equal pleasure to see you in this different context. You said that 10 years have passed since you studied for your MFA. If you entered the RISD program, for example, next year, do you think you would be received in the demeaning way that you were 10 years ago?
Well, first of all, I was not received in a demeaning way, mostly. I was mostly kind of invisible. And what I knew was not useful knowledge. That would be very different now, I think, for two reasons. One is that RISD has done a lot of work itself. And two, our country has changed since last year, thanks to George Floyd's sacrifice of his life.
Thank you for that answer. And I did want to get a chance
Nikki
to.
Weinstein is raising her hand.
Oh, whoops, we've got someone raising their hand.
Yeah.
Nell?
It's Nancy who's raising her hand.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Nancy.
Nell Painter. I'm a Newark girl. So
Oh yeah.
I'm a hospice nurse, and I was a hospice nurse in Newark.
Yes.
So I know all the places you were talking about. Yes. And my husband grew up on South 11th and 18th Avenue. And I just hope that with your studio in the Ironbound section, you have a great lunch in one of those fabulous restaurants.
Yeah.
And you started younger than me. I just started painting. I'm 80 now, and I've been painting for 5 years. So thank you for giving me the courage to keep going on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and let's see. Here's a follow-up on the relationship question to help us understand what that was. How have relationships helped you? Because mastering relationships and connecting with others is integral to success. Many artists seem more focused on skills.
Well, you can't do it by yourself. You can't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without my husband. You know it. I couldn't have done it without my mother. I have one reason I knew that I could do this, that is to say, to start all over, is that I knew that there would be smart, savvy, battle-tested older women who knew how to do things and who would appreciate a dedicated, hardworking, serious student like myself. So I knew there would be help, and there was. So I don't know if I would say that I was in a relationship with those women, but at every point I could count on a woman, maybe not physically older than me, but with more experience. And that was really extraordinary.
Very good. And now we have a question from Heather Stivison, who has wonderful artworks here in the Art Center now. And she writes, I'm a Jersey girl from Essex County and got my MFA in Massachusetts at age 66 after a career in museums. Your book resonated with me and got me through the tough times of feeling invisible. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that.
Now I want to have at least a moment to show one of your pieces, because I got this already on the shared screen. So I'm going to jump into that before someone else asks a question.
Robin Joyce Miller is waving her hands.
Oh, okay, Robin. Yes, Robin, go ahead.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yes.
We do.
I just want to say that I've got my book creating.
Oh, great. Yeah, wonderful.
I'm a New York City art teacher, and I was, so many things in your book resonated, too many things to even go over. But I mean, I was insecure about my art. My father was an illustrator, and he told me, you are not an artist, you are a teacher. Fortunately, in 2005, I met Faith Ringgold, and she became my mentor from 2005 to 2012. I went to her garden parties, and so she's been a part of my life for a very long time. So that was amazing. Uh-oh.
Oops. Thank you, Robin, for those comments. And I know Nell is trying to fix the light coming behind her. Whoops, we just lost your video, Nell.
There we are. Okay.
There, you're back. Oh, and now the lighting is perfect.
Much better.
Yes. Down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm glad to have been a resource, Robin. I'm sorry your father said that. You know, there's a chapter in Olden Art School about illustration and the context of fine art.
Yes.
Which probably resonated for you too.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's changed between 20th century art and 21st century art is that 21st century art embraces a lot of what we would think of as illustrators' techniques. And this is one of the reasons I mentioned Andy Warhol.
Yes.
And I did want to try to show one of these art books that you have been doing, and I'm going to share the screen here and show this one here.
Oh yeah.
And and maybe you could speak a little bit about this art book and how you made it and what it looks like in person.
Okay, why don't you move through it and I'll just keep talking. This is from summer of 2002. So made very, how many images do you have of this?
I thought that I could scroll down, and somehow it's not scrolling down.
Yeah, this is a book, and the title resonates from the American history, Black American history that I grew up with.
And I'm gonna pull it as you're talking about. I'm gonna try and pull up a better version of it. So please go ahead.
John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom, first published in 1947, and so that was how I knew that the history I learned in school was woefully incomplete. So slavery to freedom, slavery in my little book, and it is a book, and you'll see on the side that they're the remainders of, to show that it comes out of a notebook. The slavery part is Black Death, police brutality, and some of the pages just have the names of people who have been sacrificed. And then other pages say hope that maybe all these deaths will mean something, will lead us to something more like freedom. And one step to freedom is tearing down Confederate monuments. Another is silencing the singing of Dixie, which tells you always to remember the old times being slavery. And then there's Juneteenth. As Claudia said, my parents were Texans. I was born in Texas, though my parents bonded over not wanting to stay in Texas. So I was never sent back to Texas or anything like that. Okay, there you have the sacrificed people. But Juneteenth in California was a holiday. It was a small holiday because in the 20th century, it was not recognized as something of importance to all Americans. That is to say, to celebrate freedom. So the 2 pages that celebrate freedom, okay, this one that you're looking at now is the outpouring of demonstrations against police brutality and for Black Lives Matter. There are Texans on horseback celebrating Juneteenth, and there's one page that actually shows the text of the proclamation that was that came out on the 19th of June, 1865 in Texas from Galveston, to say that slavery was done with and those who had been enslaved are free. And this book ends with the words to lift every voice and sing, which I grew up with as the Negro national anthem, which is now considered the Black national anthem, which I wish were our country's anthem, because it's uplifting. It's not about battles. It's about recognizing what we have gone through and being proud of ourselves and true to our native land. So here's the end of Lift Every Voice and Sing. So that's freedom.
And this book, what size is this book, Nell? Is it large?
Let's see, it's about, no, it's small. It's like 7 by 5.
Yeah.
So it's the size of a regular book, but it is a digital work. And so what you're seeing is not the same as what I made by hand. You're seeing a digital work. People who work digitally will recognize the hallmarks of the way that colors work together digitally or don't go together digitally, digital textures, of changes you can make from handmade work into a digital image. So I have in my studio in the Adirondacks, the physical book, which doesn't look exactly like this. What you're seeing exists on Gallery of Pharaoh's webpage under their publications page.
And of course, this is really an example of your art combining your love of words,
yes,
and yes, images, and it all comes together.
Yeah,
here.
Very much a work from last year.
Yeah. And I believe I have something else to show here. Let's see what we've got. This is a little PowerPoint with some of your images from your website. So I'm going to pull that up and see if that works. Let's see here if we can do this right. Okay.
Yeah, this is Wise Woman Disappears. It's a woodcut that I made in early 2017 at the Brodsky Center. It's one of my many, many, many self-portraits. This is The History of White People by Nell Painter. And the text comes from the book, The History of White People. And the by Nell Painter part is my mouth collaged on top of it. This is a piece I made for the Zimmerli Museum at Rutgers University, and it's Paul Robeson Activist. It's actually a collage, the hand drawing, and then the text is collaged on top.
I only have 2 of these. I know it's a series.
Right, it's a whole series, hand-colored lino prints from 2018 called Swampy Land by the River Dawn. And this is part of the Odalisque Atlas series, which actually comes out of the history of white people. And it's about the places where young enslaved girls who were sexually available come from, the Black Sea. This actually is Volga River, goes down into the Black Sea. This is one of my favorites. It's called Chapter Revised. And I made this while I was working on the history of white people, and I was at Mason Gross. And in the background is actually part of the manuscript of the history of white people. And then collaged on, actually sewn on top of it, Claudia, pieces of a man's tie from the Salvation Army. But that's how revision can sometimes feel on top of one's work. This is a piece I made for my dear friend Thaddeus Davis, who retired from the University of Pennsylvania a few years ago. And those are her words from her works, her books, and hand drawing of her, Thaddeus Davis. This is another Brodsky piece. I don't remember the title of this, but you'll see the 2 little self-portraits. And again, that piece of cloth, which I brought from either Ghana or Nigeria in the 60s. I've had it forever. It reappears in the pieces I made then.
And that might be the last one I have. Let's see. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice selection.
And we're back. So other questions for Dr. Painter. Now is your opportunity for questions. And I'm looking around and seeing if we have any raised hands or
Angela has a question.
Okay. Yes. Angie.
Hi, Dr. Painter. It's a pleasure to see you and hear you.
Thank you.
So I found your comments about Martha's Vineyard particularly interesting because I am also from California, born and raised in Riverside, and didn't know much about the vineyard till I came here. But I recently learned about the history of Black people on the vineyard and how they were able to buy property there before almost anywhere else in the country, and why that's such a special place for Black people. And so I'm wondering, in all the places that you've been across the country in Ghana, where is your special place? So where is your happy place that you feel most comfortable, most at home?
Wow. I think about that sometimes because the question of home is on people's minds now. It's a theme that I encounter, and I think, where is my home? And my home is kind of where I am. Right now, I think of my home as being Newark. But, I've been in the Adirondacks for over a year, and I'm at home there. I have an anti-racist community there. So it's kind of that. But if you had asked me, before the theme of home became so important, and you said, well, where's your home? I would have said Oakland.
Thank you very much.
Where are you from?
I'm from Riverside.
Oh yeah, I had an aunt who lived there. It's the hottest place in the world.
Yeah, I don't miss it this time of year.
Yeah.
And I think I have a question I wanted to ask. We'll see if other questions come in. But I wondered if you thought January 6th will affect your art going forward.
I don't know. My agent is circulating a reworking of the history of white people, which needs to be updated to take account of the Trump era. And that's kind of the culmination of the Trump era. So if that project gets contracted, then it will. The problem is that the history of white people, my book and my approach, is an intellectual history. It's not a political history. I mean, there has to be some politics in it, of course. And I don't want to say that January 6th equals white people. But what I do need to say is that January 6th becomes a white people's counterpart to the theme of voting rights, which, I mean, the theme of voting rights should be unraced, because it should be a citizenship right for all adults who are citizens. But it's become a Black theme. It has become a theme for the Democrats. So on the one side, and here I'm speaking sort of symbolically, the symbolic Blackness is voters' rights, and symbolic whiteness is January 6th. I mean, you know, that's about how we think in terms of simplified, vision inflected, visions of the meaning of our country's politics. So the short answer is probably yes, and I don't know how yet.
Okay. And here's a question. Could you touch briefly on your work with the MacDowell colony, with MacDowell?
Oh, yeah. I am Madam Chairman of MacDowell, which is no longer a colony. The staff decided they did not want to be colony anymore, so it's MacDowell, an artist residency. I was there twice. I finished Olden Art School there in 2016. I started what is becoming a new project called the Ancient Hair Book in late 2019. My job is to serve on the board, but also to reach out to artists and to encourage artists of all sorts. Our only criterion is excellence. And that criterion, of course, needs to constantly be examined for meanings and for interpretations. We have very good committees who go over the applications, and we strive to be a place of openness, but also of seriousness of our work as artists in many, many fields.
Very good. And other questions from the group? We're at close to 8 o'clock, so I know.
Laura, I should add
yes.
that as Madam Chairman, and I say that sort of in the French sense of Madame le Maire, Madam Chairman, I have hosted or am hosting 4 conversations on art questions, relations relative to meaning and aesthetics and value and recognition. The first 2 have already occurred, and you can find them on the website of the 92nd Street Y. There are 2 more to go. The one that will be broadcast in July is on excellence, aesthetics, and value. And I will have Jane Quick to See Smith and Joyce Kozloff as visual artists. Garth Greenham, who is a dealer, who has recognized excellence in artists who had not been recognized fully. And Linda Harrison, who is the director of the Newark Museum of Art. And the museums, of course, constantly have to deal with questions of excellence, aesthetics, and value. And then in the fall, the question of the meaning of how big money influences how we can see art. And the people taking part in that are Mary Smith Campbell, who is presently the president of Spelman College, but who was a groundbreaking director of the Studio Museum in Harlem as it went from a scrappy institution to one that attracted major money, basically, and the difference that that could make in the Studio Museum in Harlem. Another is Lonnie Bunch, who shepherded the American Museum of African American History of Culture, which was, he had to raise a lot of money to get that incredible institution off the ground. Right now, he's the head of the Smithsonian. So once again, he has a lot of money at his disposal. How does that change things? And the third person will be Mark Peo, who is the director of Hauser and Wirth, which is one of the biggest, and Mark wouldn't like my saying this, but richest dealerships in the world.
So some amazing talks coming up. And
92nd Street Y and McDowell.
Yes, so I can maybe figure out links that I can send to everyone on this meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone would be interested in seeing those talks. Those sound fascinating.
Yeah, you can get them on the 92nd Street Y.
Great, perfect. And I want to just say thank you so much, Nell Painter, for being with us here tonight, and the applause from all. And I know we're all so appreciative to have you here. And of course, thank you, Claudia, so much for the conversation as well. And it was really a fascinating conversation all the way through, start to finish. But we're really honored to have Nell Painter here. And, you know, I asked her probably 2 years ago if she would come. But, you know, Zoom brings up this thing where people don't have to travel to come.
Yeah, we can do it.
So I appreciate it so much. You're taking the time, a very busy person. And I know many of us enjoyed and loved your books and hope to read more. So thank you again for all you do for all of us, and all your commentary is so important to us these days. So thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. We appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.